I had everything everyone told me to want: the successful husband, the beautiful home, the life that looked flawless from the outside. But at 36, I made a decision that shocked everyone who knew me. I walked away, and what I discovered on the other side changed everything I thought I knew about love, happiness, and what it means to truly live. You know, there's this moment that happens in some marriages. It's not dramatic. There's no screaming, no throwing plates, no catching someone in a lie. It's quieter than that, more insidious. It's the moment when you're sitting across from your spouse at dinner, and you realize you have absolutely nothing to say to each other, not because you're angry, but because somewhere along the way, you became strangers who share a mortgage. That moment happened to me on a Tuesday evening in March, and it was the beginning of the end of my perfect marriage. From the outside, my life was the definition of success. My husband was a respected professional, well-liked in our community, financially stable. We lived in a lovely neighborhood where people waved to each other and everyone seemed to have their lives together. We took annual vacations to nice places, hosted dinner parties that people complimented for weeks afterward, and our social media posts looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Friends would tell me how lucky I was. My mother would remind me that good men like him didn't grow on trees, and I'd smile and nod and feel this growing emptiness inside that I couldn't quite name. The truth is, we had built a beautiful life together, but somewhere in the construction, we'd forgotten to build a foundation of genuine connection. We were excellent roommates. We were competent co-managers of a household. We were polite, considerate, and rarely fought because we rarely engaged deeply enough to have anything worth fighting about. And for years I told myself this was maturity. This was what real adult relationships looked like after the honeymoon phase faded. This was stability, and I should be grateful for it. But that Tuesday evening, watching him scroll through his phone while I pushed food around my plate, something inside me cracked open. I was 36 years old, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time he'd asked me about my dreams. I couldn't recall the last time we'd laughed together about something only we understood. I didn't know what kept him awake at night anymore, what hopes he carried, what fears lived in his heart. We had become two people living parallel lives under the same roof, and the loneliness of it was crushing me slowly, day by day. The scary part wasn't that things were terrible. It was that they were fine. And fine, I realized, can be more dangerous than bad. When things are bad, you know something needs to change. When things are fine, you can drift for years, decades even, numbing yourself to the quiet desperation, telling yourself that this is just what life is. You convince yourself that everyone feels this way, that the butterflies and deep conversations and feeling truly seen by another person are things reserved for movies in the early days of dating. You settle into fine, and you let it slowly dim your light until you can't remember what it felt like to truly shine. I started paying attention to how I felt in my own body, in my own life. I noticed that I smiled more when he wasn't around, that I felt more myself when I was alone or with friends than I did in my own home. I realized I'd been editing myself for years, making myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, less vibrant. Not because he was cruel or controlling, but because we'd fallen into patterns where I'd learned that certain parts of me weren't welcome, weren't appreciated, caused friction. So I'd packed those parts away one by one until I barely recognized the woman I'd become. The decision to leave didn't happen overnight. It happened over months of soul searching, of therapy sessions where I finally admitted out loud what I'd been feeling, of late-night conversations with friends who'd sensed something was wrong long before I could name it. It happened through journaling pages filled with questions I was afraid to answer. What would my life look like if I chose joy over security? What would it mean to start over at 36? Could I live with myself if I stayed in a marriage that was suffocating my spirit, even if it looked perfect to everyone else? The guilt was overwhelming. He hadn't done anything wrong, not really. He wasn't abusive or unfaithful or neglectful in obvious ways. He was just emotionally unavailable in ways that had become normalized between us. And how do you explain to people that you're leaving a good man because you need more than good? How do you make them understand that a marriage can be perfectly functional and completely unfulfilling at the same time? When I finally told him I wanted a divorce, he was shocked. In his mind, everything was fine. We didn't fight. We had a nice life. What more did I want? And that reaction, more than anything else, confirmed what I already knew. We were living in completely different realities. What felt like suffocation to me felt like comfortable routine to him. What I experienced as emotional distance, he saw as peaceful coexistence. We'd both been sleeping in different ways, and I was simply the first one to wake up. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Friends took sides or disappeared altogether. Family members questioned my decision, some gently, some not so gently. I heard every variation of, "But he's such a good man," and "You're throwing away everything you've built," and "You'll regret this when you're alone." The judgment was heavy, and there were days when I almost turned back, almost convinced myself to settle for fine rather than face the unknown alone. But here's what I learned on the other side of that decision, in the rebuilding that followed. I learned that loneliness in a marriage is so much worse than loneliness while single. When you're alone, at least you're authentically alone. But when you're lonely next to someone who's supposed to be your person, it's a special kind of heartbreak that erodes your sense of self day by day. I learned that starting over at 36 isn't the tragedy everyone made it out to be. Yes, it was scary. Yes, I had to rebuild my life from the ground up in many ways. But I also got to rediscover who I was underneath all those years of compromise and accommodation. I remembered that I loved painting, something I'd given up because it seemed impractical. I made new friends who knew this version of me, not the married, polished, perfect version I'd been performing. I learned to sit with myself, to enjoy my own company, to make decisions based solely on what I wanted without considering how it would affect someone else. The most surprising discovery was how much lighter I felt. I hadn't realized how much energy it takes to maintain a marriage that isn't feeding your soul. Every day I'd been putting on a performance, telling myself and the world that everything was wonderful, pushing down the truth that I was withering inside. When I finally stopped performing, when I let the marriage end and allowed myself to grieve it fully, I felt like I could breathe deeply for the first time in years. I'm not saying divorce is the answer for everyone in an unfulfilling marriage. Some couples do the hard work and rebuild genuine connection. Some find their way back to each other with the help of counseling and commitment and vulnerability. But I am saying that you deserve more than fine. You deserve a relationship where you feel seen, heard, cherished, challenged in good ways, supported in your growth, and genuinely connected to your partner. You deserve to be with someone who's curious about your inner world, who wants to know you deeply, who chooses you actively rather than just defaulting to the status quo. Looking back now, I don't regret my perfect marriage. It taught me valuable lessons about what I need, what I won't compromise on again, and what true partnership actually looks like. But I also don't regret walking away from it. That decision, as terrifying as it was, gave me my life back. It returned me to myself. At 36, I chose to start over, to face uncertainty, to risk judgment and loneliness and financial instability for the chance at something real. And here's what I want you to know if you're in a similar place, feeling that quiet desperation in a relationship that looks good on paper. Your feelings are valid. The loneliness you feel is real, even if your partner isn't doing anything obviously wrong. You're allowed to want more than fine. You're allowed to choose yourself, even when it disappoints others. Life is too precious and too short to spend it in a beautiful cage, no matter how comfortable that cage might be. The truth about walking away from my perfect marriage is this: it wasn't perfect at all. It was just pretty. And pretty isn't enough. Not for a life. Not for the one existence we get on this earth. We deserve substance, depth, genuine connection, and the freedom to be fully ourselves with the person we choose to share our lives with. And if that's not what you have permission to imagine something different. You have permission to choose yourself, even at 36, even when everyone thinks you're crazy, even when you're scared, especially then.